Hey everybody, this is Mike and welcome to the Reelblack podcast. Today we have a great guest, a good friend joining us from across the pond, as they say, filmmaker Joseph A. Adesunloye. Welcome to the Reelblack podcast. How you doing, man?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
And the reason you're here is because you've got a brand new film out now on Apple TV and Amazon Prime called
White collar.
How's the new collection going?
Leke, countless times I have called you and told you your father is not doing very well. Leke, your father has died.
Your dad is also a photographer. He must be very proud of you.
So the story is about a young mixed race or biracial, as our dear American cousins say, young man who basically had been estranged from his father for a very long time. And when his father gets ill and then suddenly dies, he has to return to Senegal to bury his father. But essentially, he goes on a journey to rediscover a part of his culture that he had long sort of forgotten and lost. And the inspiration to make it came of my own reflection after losing my own father a few years before I made the film, and also reconnecting with my Nigerian heritage.
right, and this is your first feature film coming out of London Film School,
Well, actually, I went to the London Film Academy.
Film
So
Academy.
after, yeah, so after I graduated from the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, I then went to film school in London for a year to sort of focus on practical elements of it. And then, yeah,
Impressive. Did you grow up in Britain? That's the question. Or did you just
I
go to
did grow.
school in Britain?
No, I grew up in Britain. So I was born in Nigeria, and then I moved to Britain when I was 12 years old. So so I've been here for quite a while.
So what's it like going back to the continent to make a film?
For me, it was so special. It's home. There's a call in whenever I'm on the continent, whichever country. It just feels right. So Senegal is such a special place as well. I don't speak any French, so going to a French-speaking country to make a film and being able to do it, it just tells you how welcoming and open they really are. And it's a country that's full of culture and just the most mesmerizing landscapes. It's one of the most diverse, landscapes you're going to see in Africa in a tiny country. It's just glorious, and the people are so wonderful. So, and they have a pink lake.
Yeah, well, that you shot in. I thought that was
Yeah.
color correction.
Well, we did a bit of color correction for the sake of it, but the lake itself is actually pink. So it goes after the rainy season, it becomes a bit sort of muddy. But before that, it's a proper pink lake. It's a salt lake, and they actually dredge it for salt. So the kind of famous Senegalese salt is from that lake.
Wait, so I mean, just on a technical level, how big is your crew, and how many days does it take for you to even make a
Sure.
film there? Yeah.
Sure. So in terms of our crew, it sort of worked in two ways. So we took our key crew from the UK, and I think from the UK, including actors. Well, an actor came from Nigeria as well, actually. So I think there were about between 10 or 11 people from the UK. And then we had a Senegalese crew. And in Senegal, there we were about, I'd say about 20 to 25 Senegalese people. So together, we're over sort of 30 people working on this.
How much planning is involved in terms of getting it to look the way it does, and to make sure that you hit your story beats? Because it seems like a lot of it you can't really predict until you get there what's going to happen.
Yes, so in terms of visual storytelling, I like to be quite deliberate because obviously, as you can see from the film, there's not a lot of dialogue in the film. So, which means that, how we hold the moments become very important. And my cinematographer and I, Rory, we were quite clear in terms of the kind of tone and the mood that we wanted and the palette that we were going for. But you're right. With a situation like that, it's when you get on the ground that you really then allow the environment to kind of speak to you, and then it's then the best way to try and capture that. So a lot of that was about, respecting the space and looking at that space in the way that it's just so awe-inspiring, and I wanted to kind of capture a sense of that majesty, really.
I think you do. I mean, but in terms of the story beats, how much of a script do you have going in, and then how much does it change while you're shooting?
Sure. So yes, the entire film was scripted, and and then yes, when we were on the ground, there were certain elements that we had to modify as we were shooting, but actually not that much of it. So we were fortunately able to shoot essentially what it is that I had sort of scripted, and because I had scripted in a way that I knew needed to be felt, and I was also lucky because I had been to Senegal previously, to do a recce and stuff. So when I came back, I was able to modify the script even more so it really fit into that Senegalese environment. Okay. But then comes the other process where we then had to find the film again, really, in the edit with my editor Chris, because it became so. Although the kind of the chronology of the film largely stayed the same, but there were things that just felt better in a different way. So it was a completely different filmmaking journey by the time we got into the edit suite to really try and crystallize what it is that we were trying to say.
Okay, so just to clarify, did you shoot in sequence the story, or did you have it blocked out? Like,
yeah, no, we had it blocked out because it was half and half, really, because we shot Senegal first, and we shot London last. So the beginning of the film is actually what we shot last.
Okay.
And in terms of Senegal, we shot slightly chronologically because we were moving locations many times. So we shot Dakar, and then after Dakar, we moved into Popenguine, which is the village that he sort of ends up, where his father is. And then after that, we shot Pink Lake, and then, back to Dakar for a tiny little bit of final pickups, and then we came to London and did that bit. But it was because of the fact that there wasn't a lot of dialogue, and because of the fact that Dudley and I had spent a very long time before we traveled. We'd meet once a week for 4 or 5 months and really just go through that material with him, just really trying to understand what was happening with this character and exchanging notes, so that it helped that process when we were underground to try and go through that journey with him. And I didn't want to interrupt, the chronology of shooting as much as possible, so that, that so he could feel it and he could stay in it. And I think that really helped us.
Wow, no, I mean, I could, when you see the film, you can say, well, this is really well directed, not just on a visual level, but just working with your actors. Which, not the least of which, is your lead, Dudley O'Shaughnessy. So, I mean, can you speak to casting and working with your lead actor beyond this? What you just said.
In terms of Dudley, when we, when I approached Dudley to do this, at that point, I absolutely had a clear vision as to what it is that I kind of hoped that he would want to do with me, and it needed to be very much a collaboration. So, I met him. When I met him, I was still writing, so I didn't give him a script. I just told him the story. I sat down with him and we ordered some tea, and I think I literally talked at him for about an hour. And he didn't even have time to have his tea. I was just talking at him. And so at the end of that process, I was painting a picture of what the story meant, what I was trying to do, hoping that he would be part of that journey with me. And he listened very politely, as he is a really wonderful person. And because of a connection that we also both have in terms of our fathers, it resonated with him as well, elements of what I was trying to say about that father relationship. So then we agreed to work together. But then I knew very much that once we were going to work together, he needed to take ownership of the material. So once the script was written, he cast his eye over it quite a lot, and we worked on it together quite a lot, just to make sure that, and I'm talking detailed because he's a very detailed orientated person. So, he'd kind of go in and go, well, this word here, the feeling isn't quite, And so we did a lot of work because we knew that when we're on the ground in Senegal, we wouldn't have a lot of time to do rehearsals. So we spent a lot of time in London really trying to understand that material, before we got there.
Mm. Now, not only is the film bold in terms of its visual sense, but also the sexuality in the film is very pronounced. And it's a very non-traditional relationship that you see. I mean, can you speak to that in terms of like what you wanted to present on the screen? Because it's something that we're not necessarily always used to seeing this type of character.
Sure.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. In terms of the fluidity of his sexuality.
In many respects, I wanted to, present a black man, or well, I'm a biracial man, but for all intents and purposes, a black man who doesn't fit into a box. We are complicated kind of beings, and for him, sexuality also, I think it's an interesting kind of challenge because, as you see in the London parts of the film, this incredibly kind of hedonistic lifestyle, but it doesn't achieve anything. He doesn't feel anything. He's in London. He's got all these trappings of success, but something is missing. And so all the sex and some of the drugs and all of those things trying to numb something or awaken something that just doesn't quite happen. And so by the time he gets to Senegal and he makes that other connection, although it also has a sexual element, the dynamic is very different to the women that he's with in London versus when he gets into Senegal. But the use of the sex and the sexuality there was to, these are young people exploring the world in a very different kind of way in which their bodies also belong to them. And there's no need to be shy about it. And there's certainly no need to allow other people to control it. And that's why the sex and the sexuality then manifests itself in the way that it does, because, I think that they are unafraid to express both emotionally but also sexually. And I hope,
I liked it. I appreciated it because it didn't. So many. This is what I liked about your film, Joseph. I mean, so many movies that deal with black people use the capital B. This is a movie about blackness, and no, this is a story about a homecoming. It's more about the characters, and speaking to you now, I can see what a fine brush you used to paint these characters. It's refreshing in that respect, and then it's also a travelogue. It's taking us to places that we've never had a chance to experience before. So it's a breath of fresh air for me to be able to see this on screen. So that's motive and intention is what I'm all about. So it's very interesting to hear your process in terms of that. Now, I mean, going to your background, what led you into film?
Right. I mean, I was born in Nigeria, and as a child, I watched quite a lot of. I mean, so Bollywood was quite big in Nigeria in the 80s.
Okay.
So I watched lots of Bollywood films, and then also kind of older European and sometimes a few Japanese, martial arts things and things like that. But I was always drawn to kind of emotional dramas. Whenever I'd find things where I would see people from other cultures but could relate to them on a human level because it wasn't culture specific, I was drawn to those kinds of storytelling. And so from a very early age, I kind of felt that I wanted to be part of that. I didn't exactly know what that was. And so when I moved to the UK, and I, certainly as I got into my teenage years, I was questioning whether I wanted to be an actor or whether I wanted to be a creator. And yeah, I think by the time I was about 14, 15, it was quite set in my mind that I wanted to create. And I just stuck to that, really. I have no filmmakers in my family or anything, so there's no kind of path And so it's a case of finding this journey. But I knew that also being Nigerian, one of the very important things is you have to go to university. Already, I'm already, I guess, to some parts of the family, disappointing the family because you're supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer. Those are the three usual professions that you go for as a proud African kid. And I wasn't doing any of those things. So I went and I did English literature and film studies at university for 4 years. And then after that, I went to film school. So at least, the fallback, I had an auntie once. We had a gathering, actually. We had a gathering with myself and all my cousins where we had to present our results from our final, graduation from secondary school before we went off to university. So A-levels, I guess. And she was like, oh, right, so you're going to do English literature and film. Okay, well, at least you can become a teacher if all else fails.
Yeah. No, I think you did the right way.
So that was kind of the journey into film. But it's really just from really loving other cultures. And also, for me, being a kind of Black African person, and I mean that in the kind of global African, that all of us as the global African, regardless of where we are, it was very important also that our stories got told in ways that we want to tell them. That also motivated me a lot. And I remember seeing, some of especially the French, the Francophone Black African filmmakers like Semben and Mambeti, and just seeing some of the work that they were doing, although it was very French skewed and some of the style was very kind of France, but still you could see something. And it was telling stories about Black people in a very different way, certainly, that I had seen in Hollywood and seen from the UK.
Did that influence your decision to want to shoot in Senegal as opposed to going to Nigeria?
It certainly did play a part, but there was also a really practical reason. So the film was originally set in Nigeria, but Nigeria at the time was having, we were supposed to have elections, and then the elections got delayed because the president at the time was, had sort of picked up the battle with Boko Haram, which, you would know from the kidnapping of the girls. And so it just felt a little bit unstable. And West Africa also has a very specific rainy season. And if we didn't hit that mark, it would have to wait almost an entire year. And we couldn't do that. So I reached out to friends, actually. And I have a really dear friend, Adesunloye, who's a wonderful actor. He plays the taxi driver in the film. He's Senegalese. And he was going to Senegal to shoot a project. And he invited me. He said, well, come and have a look and see what you make of it, because you love Senegal from all the cinematic history that you always talk about. And I did, and I was blown away, so it became a no-brainer. And then I had to rework the script a little bit more to shift it away from the kind of cultural specific Nigerian things into the Senegalese space. The only thing that I didn't shift in the script that was quite Nigerian, or at least Yoruba, alluding to the Oshun, which is the bathing by the woman in red in the pink lake. That's a kind of, that's influenced by, Oshun, the kind of water goddess in Yoruba mythology. But I didn't want to lose that because I felt that was an important part of Leke's kind of metaphorical cleansing. And so whilst it was culturally not Senegalese, I didn't mind having that. And yeah.
In terms of getting that education in Europe and then going and using it to make films to tell your own story, it skews you in a sense. On one hand, it gives you a lot of strength and power, but then on the other hand, you can become detached from certain layers of the culture that you want to portray. I certainly have found that in my experience, going to film school and then coming out and not necessarily having the confidence just to go out and just tell a story, but it has to be a certain way. Do you have conflicts like that from time to time, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I very early on said to myself was I was going to, learning how it should be done is great. And I was therefore going to get rid of that as soon as I was done with learning how it should be done.
Okay.
Because I don't want to kind of fit into a box of saying, well, this is how it should be done, especially from a kind of European storytelling style, when African and Asian storytelling and cinema, for example, is very important to me. And the concept of time in Africa and Asia is very different to the concept of time I find in Europe and, say, North America, in terms of how stories have to unfold, in terms of, so I don't want to lose that kind of cultural part of myself. I remember being a child and having my grandmother and co sit us down at night and tell us stories. So that still remains as a part of my brain. So if it's a case of saying, and you can tell from the film, there can be moments where you go, well, is this shot holding too long? Is this moment lasting too long? Cut it. But I was like, no, because sometimes it's important to just sit in it. And that's important for me as a storyteller. The reality is, obviously, at the same time, there are also formats that work with, certain spaces, and one is needing to be adaptable. And I think I can be adaptable. But when I'm creatively, what drives me very much is to try and forge my own way to tell my own stories.
When you were in school, was that a challenge to your professors and your classmates, or were you very, very much a blinders-focused type student?
I think I was probably a blinders-focused type student, because I'm very talkative, and I'm also very aware of what I want and what I like. Not in a sense of going, I'm not listening to anyone, because I do. But I definitely knew that as long as I learned what I needed to learn, then I don't need to ruffle any feathers in that sense. And then I will make what I want to make using that tool. And actually, I remember that when I made my graduation film, we had a showcase where obviously not all the films could be screened to the industry. And I made a short horror, but not quite horror. It was kind of slow burner and but more kind of mental distress element rather than slasher horror. And it didn't really kind of fit anywhere. And I remember the head of our course, therefore not presenting it to the industry showcase and leaving my film out because he didn't know exactly how or where it was going to fit. And at the time, all my fellow students were like, well, this is a travesty. We really love your film, Shadowed. We think it speaks to whatever. And that really annoyed me very much for a long time. But things like that also allow you to know that, we can't also always be reliant on what is acceptable by other people's standards, especially, custodians of access and industry and that kind of stuff, so we also have to make our own work. So I'm very much of that mindset. I will continue to make my own work, and I still want to do more mainstream commercialized things as well.
So what's next for you?
Right. So, one of the big crossovers that I'm trying to do is, I've got a couple of things that are in various stages of development, because television is, I guess, at the stage where the sustained career path lies in this day and age. If you're trying to, live as a storyteller, as I do. So I've been writing quite a few things, and things are in different stages of development for television. But film is also very, very important to me, and I don't think that I'll ever move away from that. And I've been an indie filmmaker for quite a long time. And so I have that spirit in me as well. And I hope that also influences, how I do things. So I've got a new film, which I shot in Spain last September, October, in the middle of the pandemic. We were able to do it. And so that's in post-production at the moment. That's my third feature film. It's called Breaking Mirrors. And it sort of looks at a relationship. It's a relationship about a queer male couple, but one is black and one is white. And it's, and that kind of some of the dynamics that deals with. So indie cinema is something I love passionately. I would love to continue to do, but I'm trying to also scale up. And also I really, really want to shoot my first American project.
Well, I have to say, White Collar Black I think it could only have come from you. It was a transformative experience for me to watch the film, and I appreciate you being on Real Black TV.
Thank you very much for having me.
They're still very bitter about what has happened. Your father died. You were not here.
I wish I had time back.
Senegal, no come kale no Leke,